All parties seem to really understand the stakes in this case. It was interesting. The judge did get involved quite a bit. He was asking questions of both the plaintiffs and the defendants. When the plaintiffs were presenting, he seemed to sort of, the best way to put it, I would say, would be put a finer point on some of their arguments, sort of clarify what the plaintiffs' arguments are. When the defense was presenting, from what I saw over the last hour or so, he did press them to sort of fortify, to calcify their arguments, so to make clear how the plaintiffs' arguments do not undercut their case in terms of the safety and effectiveness. One thing he really focused in on, Chris, was what he called intervening events, meaning the changes that the FDA made in 2016 and in 2022 to, again, change some of the rules and regulations around the prescribing of this drug, which makes me think that might be a key area when we do eventually get a ruling that we will get some kind of decision on that question around prescribing this drug via telemedicine, around who could prescribe that drug, because those are some of the issues that the plaintiffs in this case, they want to roll back some of those changes that the FDA made. Chris.
Again, no devices allowed in that courtroom. This is the first we're hearing about these critical arguments that are still underway. Dasha Burns, we appreciate you coming out and talking to us just now. Banking fears spread. We'll check on the markets as we get new details about the FBI team leading the investigation into Silicon Valley Bank. Severe weather pummeling the U.S. from east to west, with more rain on the way for flood-ravaged California. We have the latest forecast. From movies to golf courses to bowling lanes, the new approach to pricing that just might leave you with sticker shock. You're watching Chris Chancey.
They was talking a while ago there on the abortion pill deal that basically come into effect in the 70s, that basically gave America and the world the right to basically become sexually oriented, that even Loretta Lynn sung about the birth control pill, to the degree that I personally think that the birth control pill, in which we had to do something at that time to basically control the population, because if we didn't, my God, there ain't no telling how many people would be on the planet if there wasn't a birth control pill. I personally believe that it had everything to do with causing the sexual immorality of all the pervertedness that's not only here in America but throughout the world. Hollywood has become perverted. Your news magazine stands on just about every aisle you go up and down is showing sexuality and pervertedness that whenever I was growing up until that time, it went on, but it went on in behind closed doors in privacy where it was supposed to have gone on. There's a reason why that it talks about in Revelations, to see thou that thy shame of thy nakedness does not appear, in the first part of the 4 chapters of Revelations, because Christ knew that whenever he brought that to John the Revelator, whenever all that was going to come about, that it was going to be a perverted state that right now that we're in right now. So Christ already knew, by making those type of statements and making the statements that he'll not put upon to thee none of the burden, hold fast till we come. There was a reason why that he said that, and the reason why was because of the perversion, the sexual perversion. So what they was talking about is all in unison in regards towards, I believe, biblical Bible prophecy. Now, how that judge determines and what he does or what he don't do, that will be up to him. That'll be on his hands, not mine. Once more, the only thing that I can do is tell you what the Bible says. I believe that as soon as there is a heartbeat, that is considered a human being. And I don't know if that occurs in a 4-week span, a 5-week span, or a 6-week span. I'm not a professional on that, but I do know that murder is murder according to God's holy divine commandments, and there's not no telling how many children that has been aborted. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's something like, it's an unbelievable amount of number. I think it's something like 40,000 people, or 60,000 people that, and that's just the known abortions. That ain't counting the miscarriages. That's just the known abortions here in America, towards how perverted it we have become since basically the mid-70s, the early to the mid-70s, that this has went on. So what this judge does and how he does it will be totally up to him.
Turmoil on Wall Street today. Bank fears are now spreading across global markets because of new concerns about the financial health of a Swiss-owned Credit Suisse, which is more than 3 times the size of the failed Silicon Valley Bank. Take a look at the numbers right now. The Dow down 530, deep in the red, although off their lows really just half an hour ago or less. Credit Suisse has a major presence here in the U.S. And meantime, a senior law enforcement official tells NBC that an investigation into the collapse of SVB is being led by FBI agents who specialize in white-collar crime. Let's bring in NBC News business and data reporter Brian Chung and justice and intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And what is going on, Brian, with Credit Suisse, and how worried should all of us be?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, this is a Swiss bank that has substantial presence here in the United States, but this is a bank that has had some liquidity issues as of late. There's been a lot of deposits falling away from the bank in the last quarter or so. And by the way, these are some concerns that have kind of predated the issues at Silicon Valley Bank over the weekend. This is a bank that as of late has another scandal, which is admitting themselves that they have some material weaknesses in the way that they've been reporting their financials. So this is a firm that has had issues historically, but again, the stock down 21% just today. So you see investors really concerned about that particular firm.
Yeah, speaking of stock, Ken, you're reporting that part of the investigation into the Silicon Valley Bank is going to be about stock, and stock that was sold in particular by executives ahead of the closing of that bank. Our friends at CNBC point out that over the past 2 years, executives have sold $84 million worth of stock. CEO Greg Becker cashed in more than $3 million in the week before the failure, almost $30 million in the past 2 years. So what are your sources telling you about this overall investigation?
They're saying that the FBI and the SEC has to take a look at whether any inside information was used in those stock sales. That would be illegal. Now, the CEO sold his shares pursuant to a plan that was executed in January. Nonetheless, I mean, that stock is worthless now. It was at $1,300 a share. And so the government needs to look and make sure that nobody traded on improper inside information. And if they did that, they broke the law. That would be a big problem.
How complicated are those types of cases?
You know, the data, the SEC has the data. It's easy for them to understand exactly what was sold when. The question of motive, that is complicated. Insider trading cases often hinge on, for example, wiretaps, which probably don't exist in this case. So proving someone's motive is a problem.
What did they know? When did they know it? Getting inside their brain. So how do these, so you start with SVB, but now you're looking at global concerns. How do they complicate the job of the Federal Reserve, which everyone's been waiting to see what they're going to do about interest rates again?
Yeah, well, it certainly doesn't make it easier, right? It's going to make it harder, if anything. And prior to all of this, prior to last weekend...
What does that mean to make it harder? A harder decision, nobody cares whether or not it's a hard decision for the Fed. What we want to know is how is it likely to impact them?
Yeah, well, I mean, because again, the Federal Reserve has been in this effort to try to raise interest rates to take care of inflation, but one of the dominoes to fall that led to Silicon Valley Bank's collapse was higher interest rates. So if they end up backing off a little bit, which is the talking point on Wall Street right now in terms of raising interest rates, then maybe they don't get the job done on inflation that fast. So that would be something that the American people would continue to feel at the store as they continue to see high prices. If the Federal Reserve can't fully hit the brakes on high inflation because of what's happening in the financial services sector, high prices might be something that Americans will have to continue to deal with.
A little bit of pressure, maybe.
A little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Ken Delaney and Brian Chung, good to have both of you here. Thank you. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this more in the days ahead. After a series of dangerous...
And the bottom line is this: whenever it comes to the financial problems, you know, I said all along, every time that they was raising the rates, especially along about the third time last year, that it was counterproductive in what that they was doing, due to the fact that everybody was trying to recuperate from COVID that basically was in a nonstop position. And yes, a lot of people did get checks that shouldn't have got checks. And yes, a lot of people got checks that deservedly deserved checks. But also a lot of people got those checks that was not enough to keep them afloat. And because of it, it zapped them in whatever money that they had in their rainy day account. And some of them actually went into the 401k and done a lot of swiping that way. And it's really pathetic, because I guarantee you, if me or you or the common person down here, if we write a bad check, in which most people don't even write checks no more. I don't think I've written a check now for probably 15 years. But if you write a check, or if you make an obligation to do something and you don't do it, ordinarily you get penalized and punished on top of fees, on top of more fees, upon top of more fees. And I guess it used to be that you could write a $5 check, and if you didn't catch it in time and it wound up going to the courts, that $5 check could actually cost you probably about $250. So by the public in general being held accountable for their actions, but yet now the bigger banks or the bigger institutions ain't accountable for what they do. And I realize that these investors take risks, and I realize that the United States government said that they was not going to basically support or back them up, of the actual investors, but the people that was making the deposits, that those people's money would be backed up. Now, I don't know what their arithmetic is towards what that they've done or what that they didn't do in regards towards their fuzzy math, but I guarantee you there's been 3 banks now just within the past 4 or 5 days that's come about. There's probably going to be many other banks that's going to look at their outstanding resources, and there's going to be a lot of them that's going to be in the red. And the reason why is because whenever you raise the rates on top of everything else that went on, and the feds think that they could raise the interest rate in stopping the inflation, and what actually started the inflation, and everybody and their brother knows it, I don't know if they're willing to talk about it or not, was the oil petroleum companies, Exxon, Valdez, Shell, and all the rest of them, that made outstanding all-time record profits last year by driving the prices up to $5, $6, $7, and sometimes $8, $9, I guess even $10 a gallon out in California. I don't know. Those was the ones that offset or upset the apple cart. And then for Congress, or for the feds, the Greenspanders, I call them the Greenspanders because Greenspan was really big on all this stuff, basically went in and shoved it down the consumer's throat. Well, now we're going to raise the interest rate. And they not only done it once, they now have done it twice. If I'm not mistaken, they've done it 4 or 5 times in the same year. And to think that that was stopping the inflation was beating the horse on the wrong end, because in actuality, what was creating the inflation, and I've said this all along, was the oil petroleum companies. Those people should have went to jail. But yet, no, you don't hear government officials trying to mandate that, because I guess maybe they're afraid that they'll hold oil over our heads to the point that they'll use it for, something I guess they can blackmail us with the oil companies. And in a sense, what OPEC has already done by reducing a great deal of their pumping from their natural limits and what that they do, in a sense, that's exactly what OPEC was doing. It was holding the world hostage by not producing the amount of oil that the world was basically accustomed to. And of course, whenever you do that, everything based on supply and demand, you drove the demand up, and by driving the demand up, you drove the price up. And we have seen them do this now again and again and again towards destabilizing economies, especially smaller economies or weak economies. And this time it really caught up with them because it was on top of a major catastrophe. And I'm just not talking about the war, which the war in and of itself was a catastrophe in and of itself, but the catastrophe of COVID, and then here come the catastrophe of driving all the prices up. They brought this upon themselves. No wonder the bank went under, or these banks are looking at their bottom line. It was the government that caused them to do this, on top of what the oil petroleum companies done, on top of COVID. Now, COVID, we really didn't have no choice in that matter, because that was a biological germ that was floating around that never should have got over here to begin with. That once more, whose administration was guilty for that? Donald Trump's administration. Once more, let's look at one other fact pertaining to the breakdown with the banks. It was Donald Trump that basically reversed what Congress had done in 2008, 2009, that led to the first bubble burst. It was Donald Trump that reversed those restrictions to the point that now these banks could basically do whatever that they wanted to do. And there's no doubt in my mind that there was some sort of hokey pokey inside trading going on towards people knowing that they was fixing to do what they was fixing to do. And that's the reason why everybody got all their bonuses and promotions, and they got their checks cashed and their money in the hand, and they took off before the boat actually sunk. Now, you can't tell me that that was not a premeditated move upon to the CEOs and those that was involved in various banking institution collapses, especially the one in Simo Valley. I mean, you don't have to be an educated person to see the writing on the wall. That's kind of like you don't have to be an educated person to see the writing on the wall in regards towards who basically motivated or manifested the January 6th deal. Now, what they're not doing up there with the FBI and various law enforcement agencies, they're not tackling this from the upper end and going down to the bottom end. They actually done it in a half backwards, bass backwards way towards starting at the lower end with basically the foot soldiers. And now they've reached this stagnatic, I don't even know that I'm pronouncing the word right, stagnatic problem towards, all right, they've already got most of the people on the lower end, but they still haven't attacked the people on the middle of it, and they still haven't went after the people on the upper end. So by me saying that actually tarnishes the FBI and all law enforcement agencies up there that's supposed to be handling these things in a proper, justifiable form, in not seeing just due being handled properly in the eyes of the world. In the eyes of the world. And it's just, it's sickening in how things is twisted around. I'm writing a letter right now in regards towards how the FBI and the Homeland Security, the federal guys, basically was the ones that was trying to create a cover-up regarding the Windmill Ministries missions that Ronald Reagan and Ronald Reagan's administration, on the latter part of his administration, basically manipulated the public in not letting them know what had actually occurred, other than the superpowers, in convincing the superpowers that the world wasn't going to be destroyed by a Holocaust, a nuclear Holocaust. But yet, no, nobody down here on the lower end was willing to act upon it. It was a cover-up. And it would have remained a cover-up unless I was fighting tooth and nail towards trying to expose that. And I feel like in conjunction towards me going out west and staying 3 days and nights on the Davidian compound, and me going within a 5-mile radius, knocking on people's doors, asking them what they thought, those that would actually talk to me, most of them wouldn't. Most of them had gates and fences in front of their houses, in which you can't blame them for that because of how that they seen the government basically kill all those people. And then they turned around and gave everybody promotions. This was after they entrapped them by I guess, I don't know, influence. I guess the right word would be influencing them towards buying a bunch of high-powered magazine military-style guns, and then turned around and busted them for it. And they thought that they was going to be able to do that, I guess, laying down. And the fact of the matter is, they had already known that their cover had been blowed, and they still went ahead and went in there anyway. Because that happened is what motivated Timothy McVeigh, which I don't agree with what Timothy McVeigh done. And don't take that out of perspective, because I've never agreed with what Timothy McVeigh done towards basically using a vigilante tactic event towards killing 170-something people in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. But you got to admit, you got to look at the facts that the FBI and the ATF down in Texas, they wanted to cover up the whole story and only tell the public about part of the story. But then whenever Timothy McVeigh and Nichols done what they done in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma authorities turned around and done the same thing. They did not tell the whole truth. They only told part of the truth. Because I know for a fact there was certain investigators, military investigators, that was called upon of going down and viewing that site in less than 48 hours after it occurred. There was either 3 or 4 of them that come in there and stayed a couple of weeks, and when it was all said and done with, they said, not only did we believe that there was a bomb over here, but we believe that there was a bomb over here, and we believe that it was a possibility for a bomb over here. But did the Oklahoma authorities ever reveal that? No. But yet now they've got documentation to prove that there was detonators found in the lower part of the basement. That never come to the full surface of the original investigation. This is where our government is failing its people. It's only telling either portions of the truth, or it's not telling the truth at all. It's leaving people in the dark. Just like the money situation. Who in God's name would have thought that by raising the interest rate, and which that technique may have worked in the 80s, that technique may have worked in the 90s, that technique may have worked in other destabling inflations or economies, but it didn't work this time. If it done anything, all it done was cause that much more misery in adding insult to misery, because people had already been strained. And naturally, whenever you're talking about the consumer, what is the consumer going to do? They're going to run out here and hire them an attorney and go to bankruptcy court. Well, ultimately, who's going to pay for that? The banks is going to pay for it on the upper end, and the United States taxpayers is going to pay for it on the lower end. That's what's going on. It's turned into a cluster. It's turned into anarchy, because people obviously don't know, and I've said this before, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, they literally don't know their asses from a hole in the ground whenever it comes to being operating a government and govern their people in a proper form. They have allowed this thing now to get totally out of shape to the point of $32 trillion in debt. I mean, it sounds good in maybe theory towards, going and printing up $100 bills and increase the printing presses and bring more ink in. towards putting more cash out there in the world. It sounds good in theory, but in reality, what's going to happen to the cash? It's going to turn into what? Graffiti money. Funny money. The same thing as you play whenever you play graffiti. It's going to turn into fake, false money. And it's just unbelievable that in and of itself has caused the gun violence to increase the way that it has.
Presidential powers will let him, even while acknowledging he can only do so much without Congress's help.
In the meantime, my executive order directs my attorney general to take every lawful action possible to move us as close as we can to universal background checks without new legislation. It's just common sense to check whether someone is a felon, a domestic abuser, before they buy a gun.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta was at that event with Joe Biden. He joins me now. It's good to have you here. Look, I'm curious about what you think that this could accomplish, this increase in background checks. And I'm asking that in particular because we've had a number of mass shootings recently where we were told that the gun was legally purchased. So how far could that go in helping keep the guns out of people who use them for really dangerous purposes?
This is massive, what the president has proposed here and what he's done through his executive order, because it provides a nationwide floor of gun safety policies that will apply everywhere. Right now, we have various states with different approaches, and the executive order is full of evidence-based, data-based approaches that we know work. Background checks work, and he's moving as far as he can towards universal background checks as possible. Red flag laws, they work. They get guns out of the hands of people before they can hurt somebody. Safe storage works. We shouldn't be marketing to kids. We should make sure that we have appropriate oversight of gun dealers who violate the law. So this is a pretty broad and robust and far-reaching set of data-proven, data-tested.
Now, this is another basically backwards move in regards towards the gun lobbyist and the gun amendment that should have been amended 20 plus years ago whenever all this stuff started getting out of hand. You keep in mind it was 2005 whenever I sent that t-shirt to the President of the United States at the time, which was the 43rd President, Bush, of explaining to him of a bloody road ahead. Yes, I was talking about the apocalypse in regards towards the end time events, but I was also overseeing towards where we was heading with the debt and where we was heading with all these other major complications with the forces of nature and etc. And I was looking through the basically the crystal ball that God had given me to look through, in understanding that a bloody road ahead was coming. And that warning, that advisory went out in 2005, just like the advisory went out in June or July in 2007 up here in Kentucky that was misconstrued. And since 2005, beginning, I guess, with the university in Virginia, I think that occurred in 2006, we have seen gun violence only drastically increase to the point that now we're having a mass shooting that requires, I think, 4 or more people being either shot or killed. I think that to declare it as people getting killed, we have had almost one a day, if